Wars start where deep currents of conflict between major powers converge, where opposing military forces face one another, poised for action. Any false move or deliberate act could trigger bloodshed. One such flashpoint is the sharpening dispute over Taiwan, an island just 160 kilometers from the People's Republic of China. Taiwan is the focus of tectonic-scale geopolitical tensions. These threaten to explode, bringing China into a clash that would engulf the U.S. and its allies around the globe. The conflict hinges on China's claims of ownership of Taiwan, a self-governing democracy which is run like a nation, but not widely recognized as a sovereign state. Just over a decade ago, China was in no position to press its claims by force. Under its now President for Life, Xi Jinping, that has changed. He has tightened authoritarian rule and forged a formidable military focused on uniting Taiwan with what Beijing calls the Chinese Motherland. China, seeking to avoid what it knows could be an apocalyptic war, presses international organizations to hem Taiwan in. With bluster, saber-rattling, and carrot-and-stick intrusions, it pushes Taiwan to surrender. The Switzerland-sized island, home for 23 million people, refuses to succumb, preferring to be its own master. Growing Taiwanese national identity binds people together, even if they disagree about China. Since 1949, when civil war divided China, leaving Taiwan's status disputed, the island has been transformed. With the blossoming of democracy in the 1990s, Taiwan has become one of the most free and liberal societies on Earth and has raced to prosperity, becoming a global linchpin in high tech. Deeply entwined with the wealth of the China market, however, Taiwan struggles to keep its political distance. Most people just want to keep the life they have and avoid conflict. Taiwan has some room for maneuver. Though questions persist over its military readiness, Taiwan is upgrading its forces. Watching the Ukrainians fend off Russia's invasion has given Taiwan heart. Diplomatically, the island's democracy has won global sympathy, especially from the United States. The U.S., fearful of losing its own power, wants Taiwan to stand in the way of Chinese dominance in East Asia. Washington sells Taiwan billions of dollars worth of defensive weapons while leaving unclear how far the U.S. would go to defend Taiwan from an invasion, which it says China would be ready to launch by 2027. Hopes of averting war persist, but with U.S.-China rivalry deeply entrenched and the China-Taiwan standoff intensifying, the potential conflict is set to be bigger than the regional war in the Ukraine, pitting superpowers against one another and raising the specter of world war. This is Freddie Lim, who won fame for his hard rock metal band and went on to become a politician. What happens to Taiwan and the way things play out globally depend in part on what happens in the island's political arena. Lim sees politics there as deeply divided.
就一个基本的一个原则的题目，大概就是对中国的关系，你的态度是什么？你是比较亲中，还是你比较站在守护台湾，确保台湾的主权的这个立场，大概是以这两个立场作为主要的，人民会以这两个立场作为主要决定的原则吧。
This makes Taiwan national politics different from typical politics split along a left-right spectrum. Under democracy, power is passed between the blue camp, the KMT, also called the Kuomintang, and the Greens, the Democratic Progressive Party, or the DPP, and the blue-leaning Taiwan People's Party, or the TPP. What differentiates the parties is more their ideas on China than domestic issues, but Lim, who is an independent but closely allied with the Green camp, trusts voters share some underlying values.
人民可以支持国民党，但是你必须要维护台湾的主权，让台湾能够不要完全陷入中国的陷阱里面。所以我觉得，因为这个大概是台湾人民的最大的共识啦。不管你说你是支持中华民国还是台湾，但维护我们现在有的一个自由的、独立的生活，这个是人民不用讲出来，但心里大概有一个底线。
Surveys show over 80% agree on the need for multi-party democracy, but how to avoid what Lim calls China's trap is the source of contention. The Chinese Communist Party says it aims to achieve what it calls reunification, though it has never actually ruled Taiwan. It says it hopes to do this peacefully, which means with incentives and coercion. But if that fails, it vows to use force. In response, the ruling DPP, which first won power for the Green Camp in 2000, opposes unification and favors Taiwan's sovereignty, and in principle, independence. But it says declaring independence is unnecessary because Taiwan is already effectively independent. The Blue Camp, mainly the KMT, can be ambiguous about sovereignty, but opposes independence and favors unification. Most people want neither. They want to keep the status quo.
To make it simple, SQ, status quo, means right now. Right now is a democratic government. We have a right to choose a president. We have a market economy. We have a freedom. We have human rights. That's status quo.
Polls show some 90% support that sort of option. Most people are strongly inclined to see the status quo as a way to wait and see what the best solution might be. In actual voting, personal background matters, but voters of all persuasions can be swayed by either party. How to deal with China is the bone of contention.
那国民党可能比较倾向可以接受成为中国的一部分，有点像香港变成中国台湾去成为 observer， 变成观察员。那对我们来讲是这不能接受。当你成为中国的一部分，去成为国际组织的观察员，这样的外交是没有意义的，没有主权的外交是没有意义的。那我想这是一个非常基本的差异。
He called the KMT policy gouging out your eyes to cure myopia. However, in the view of KMT spokesman, the question is not necessarily one of sovereignty, nor of doing a Hong Kong, but of bringing Taiwan and China to the table, thereby allowing Taiwan to enjoy greater benefits of trade and integration with China. In the eyes of the KMT, national identity most distinguishes the parties.
For the KMT, we still hold on Chinese identity, or at least dual identity, which means Taiwanese and the Chinese identity. And the party is still pursuing the future of the co-prosperity of the entire nation. Yeah, and we have a commitment to pushing for the democratization in Mainland China.
KMT hardliners like former President Ma Ying-jeou want to make a deal with today's China, skirting the problem of melding a democracy with an authoritarian one-party state. They even emulate authoritarian methods in politics. But for KMT moderates, unification refers to a hypothetical China or one that will democratize. I met a party member whose father came to Taiwan as a soldier in 1949. She blames the DPP for provoking China with its views on independence. For her, the Republic of China, the ROC, is the big brother to the People's Republic of China, the PRC. She believes they can coexist peacefully.
我觉得两岸用和平交流是最好的，人民的自由交流是最好的。其实久而久之，自然而然就会融合一体。那你说统一吗？也不算统一，但是因为我们是分开的，我们各有各的政治，所以是不一样的。但是人民是一样的，因为同样我们都是同样的根源嘛。我认为是说，所以他没有这个那么大的理由要打台湾。
Beijing favors the KMT and puts pressure on Taiwan, but the independence aspiration, or at least effective independence, that is, the status quo, remains more popular. In 2024, the DPP won an unprecedented third term as voters opted for the Harvard-educated President Lai Ching-te, who once called himself a pragmatic worker for Taiwan independence. Lai has since tempered his views, but maintains ROC Taiwan, as he calls it, is sovereign and not part of China. That's enough to attract Beijing's ire.
今年是台湾第21届的同志游行。那我每一年会参加，是因为我觉得这是一个直接支持台湾民主跟自由、关注性少数的一个很重要的方法，因为让政府可以看到，让媒体可以看到我们人数这么多，以及让大家可以关注到性少数的重要。
With democracy, protest has burgeoned, making up for the lost years. Thanks in part to these movements, Taiwan ranks 6th in the world for gender equality. In 2019, it became the first in Asia to allow gay marriage. Gradually, issues are being teased out in these social actions, but none made a bigger leap than the 2014 Sunflower Movement. It was a protest against the trade deals with China signed by KMT President Ma Ying-jeou. But when Ma pushed the deals too far, skirting democratic processes, endangering media freedom, service jobs, and Taiwan sovereignty, outrage was sparked. The leaderless, spontaneous movement, named after the blooms brandished by the participants, was backed by thousands who besieged and occupied the legislature for 23 days. At its climax, the protest brought out Taiwan's largest ever political rally, 500,000 people.
有青年学生，有 NGO 工作者，那也有很多各行各业的上班族。市民，好，但是不可否认的，冲进立法院的那群人，很多是年轻人。然后这群年轻人的特质，基本上可以这样讲，他们是大概就是台湾如果说1990年是台湾民主化的象征的年代的话，这群人。基本上就是1990年台湾民主化出生的一个新的世代。太阳花运动鼓舞了台湾人的勇气。好，就是台湾人因为整个台湾民间社会因为太阳花运动而更加有希望的感觉。好，那过去。很多人会认为说，中国是一个大国，好，那台湾是一个小岛，好，那觉得台湾面对中国，就只能够顺从，好，那太阳花运动，打破了这个想法，在太阳花运动刚结束的时候，我们会说。太阳花运动，扩大了这个公民社会关心政治、参与政治的比例，让整个公民社会的力量茁壮。
This 36-year-old Sunflower veteran was later elected as a councillor in the Taipei city government and ran for national legislature in 2024.
所以我觉得比较可惜的是说，当这个社会运动结束之后，他在政治上面的代言人，跟他在政治上面的影响力其实是分散的。那这也导致了这场社会运动，它改变了台湾的历史，但是它并没有真正的撼动了台湾的政治板块。
你最担心的在台湾的前途是什么？
我觉得台湾现在最大的问题是，我们面临一个非常大的外在的威胁，就是中国。那在中国的威胁之下，照理来讲，一个正常国家应该是每一个政党都要 有同样的一个反并吞的路线。那不管是什么颜色的党，都是反并吞，都是认真的推动国防，然后认真的捍卫台湾的主权。然后在这个下面，我们来讨论很多的经济议题、内政议题有什么的不一样，让人民来选择。可是台湾有个很大的问题是，在台面上的这些主要的政党，似乎目前有能力执政的政党之中，只有民主进步党，它在国防跟外交上的立场是相对明确的。所以这变成台湾人民在选择的时候遇到一个困难。就是如果我要保护台湾的民主自由的独立的现状，那我好像选项非常有限。
谢谢，老板辛苦了。2号苗博雅，小朋友好，苗博雅，大家注意力，候选人。
Just a couple of hours' flight from Taiwan along the southern coast of China, one arrives at Hong Kong, the former British colony. In 1997, it was handed back to China. Despite promises to allow its 7.5 million people to keep their autonomous government for 50 years, recently China began to renege, imposing authoritarian control while persecuting political dissidents. Thousands of exiles fled abroad. I met one such exile in Taiwan.
My name is Kinman Chen.
Yeah?
I'm originally from Hong Kong. I was a professor in Hong Kong. But I was sentenced to jail because of the umbrella movements. After I was released from jail, 1 year or so, then I came here as a visiting scholar. But what we call this learning war is a place for people to express their political opinions.
This wall of protest is preserved as a tribute to the post-it notes and poems that adorned public Hong Kong walls during the pro-democracy protests. Hong Kong had been guaranteed its autonomy under what China called one country, two systems, but China's backtracking led to the 79-day umbrella protests in 2014, so named for demonstrators' use of umbrellas against pepper spray. The protest was inspired in part by Taiwan's sunflower movement a few months earlier. New plans for a crackdown on Hong Kong's freedoms triggered the 2019 protests that brought out nearly 2 million marchers. That wave of discontent rebounded on Taiwan when DPP President Tsai Ing-wen came out in support of the Hong Kong protesters. Standing up to China swung Taiwan's elections, giving her victory.
Because of the Hong Kong protests, suddenly people believe that it is important to support Tsai and his party to be the next, government. So it already changed the political landscape so much in 2019 because of the protests in Hong Kong. Taiwanese started to realize how horrible is the arrangement of one country, two system. How untrustworthy is Beijing. Even they make a promise of giving Hong Kong autonomy. So at the end, they could crack down on Hong Kong media and civil society so ruthlessly. So it really an awakening process to many Taiwanese because of the Hong Kong incident.
What happened in Hong Kong and the increasing restraints imposed by Beijing, especially the draconian national security laws of 2020 and 24, sent a chilling message back to Taiwan, captured in the slogan, Hong Kong today, Taiwan tomorrow. I've come to Hong Kong to find out what has happened here, how it's affected people's lives. But I'm restricted by the new national security law, which means that if I interview anyone, say that gentleman over there, and ask him a question and broadcast it, he could get thrown in jail and I could get thrown in jail. Some do support Chinese backroom rule of Hong Kong, but behind the scenes simmers a wide and deep discontent. I met one of the few who dared speak out. I asked about freedom of speech.
Not too many years ago, we were ranked number 18, and now we are 145. So it looks like Hong Kong's sort of fallen off the cliff. A number of news media organizations have folded up. Journalists are now languishing in jail, and quite a number of journalists have fled from Hong Kong.
What is it that makes you feel you need to be careful?
Because so many people have been arrested.
What is it? Where is the line that you...
Nobody knows. That's the problem with the NSL, the National Security Law. And not just me. business people, chambers of commerce, professional people, politicians, they all say the lines are not clear.
She went on to explain that teachers have to be very careful not to transgress for fear that they will be reported by students, while she lamented the loss of some 400,000 professionals who have fled Hong Kong.
So these people are scared. They may not be arrested, but they don't want to take a chance, and they don't want their kids to be brought up in this environment.
I repeatedly heard exiles in the UK and Taiwan saying fears of what they called brainwashing of their children contributed to their reasons for leaving. In Hong Kong, as in China, the school day includes so-called patriotic education, inculcating loyalty to China and its cleansed version of history. Textbooks are being revised in line with doctrine. Hong Kong's language, Cantonese, meanwhile, is being displaced by Mandarin Chinese. I asked Lau for her advice for Taiwan in dealing with China. She said Taiwan differs from Hong Kong. It has its own military, which China said it can keep. This is bargaining power. But she said Taiwan will need to cut a deal.
But first of all, is whether the Taiwanese people want to bargain. If they just don't even want to talk, if they just want the status quo, don't touch us, but we don't want to be reunited or whatever, well, they will have to find a way to tell China and hope China will not attack them.
Hong Kong authorities, who follow official Chinese views, see things differently. I asked whether what Hong Kong has is what Taiwan can anticipate.
In other words, as I say, it's a compromise. Now, the compromise we have in Hong Kong, hopefully, may be a good start for Taiwan. Or it may not be. Taiwan may want to say, well, I want something extra. But at the bottom of it, there is always the bottom line, which is the one country. So Taiwan has got to go back to the full bosom of motherland. But under that, you can have differences.
Dismissing the need for democracy and denying free speech was limited, Tong also blames the protests on those he termed rioters, encouraged by outside political forces. Similar blinkered ideas are typically entertained by more pro-government Hong Kongers. Back in Taiwan, I asked a Hong Kong exile about dehumanization of democracy protesters. Some people call them cockroaches.
And this framework is also the propaganda that the policemen and also the Hong Kong government wants to push forward, to say that these are the bad people, these are the good people.
He had a similar parting with a friend before leaving Hong Kong.
And he drove me home after the dinner, and we talked a lot, and of course we quarreled a lot. He has said, stability is the key. They don't want democracy. What they want is good way of living. They want to stay low on politics, but to really earn money. Make sure that they can have a stable home. They think that all the protesters are stirring up the troubles in Hong Kong. They will see to themselves, their family. They are selfish, but they do not want to see what is the public good. But if Hong Kong really put a society together, then people will need to think about the others. How this community, this society can really have a common aim and common goal.
The way China and Taiwan have evolved plays a big role in the way they feel about one another. To fathom their national characters, I talked to a businessman among the million Taiwanese who now live and work mostly in China.
我觉得在中国，我们对人会比较小心。我们会先做一个 protection， 我们会比较注意，我们可能会在还没有认识他多一点之前，我们不会告诉他太多的事情。可能是因为我们是外地人，所以我们在那个地方我们会特别小心。可是，在台湾我们比较没有这种防备心，我们会比较 open-minded， 就是我们会看到人我们都是台湾人，那我们会彼此之间的信赖程度会比较高。
He thinks the contrast is based on something fundamental.
我觉得最大的差别是在台湾这个环境里面，不管怎么样，有存在很多不同的信仰，每个人有一个自由的信仰， 在中国，我认为他们的信仰是钱，因为他们没有所谓的信仰。那当没有信仰的时候，剩下一个最重要的事情就是钱。所以凡是用钱来衡量价值，用钱来衡量人与人之间的关系。
He blamed their attitude on China's 1960s and 1970s unrest known as the Cultural Revolution, which spread moral pessimism and tore friend, family, and values apart, including religions. In contrast, Taiwan has lots of religious activity. The biggest is Buddhist, followed closely by Taoism. Less than 4% are Christians. He believes people in Taiwan tend to seek what he called a comfortable life rather than riches. When I asked how people on both sides differ, I heard about studies of Chinese reactions to life in Taiwan.
Chinese visitors expressed their surprise how they were dealt with in Taiwan, in Taiwanese society, by strangers. For example, bus drivers, service people in the 7-Eleven or in the department store. This is what I called strangers' relation.
For 20 years, he has studied behavior in China, which is a highly unequal society. He found that people won't treat those outside their social circle, that is to say, strangers, with sincerity or equality.
Taiwan is a more equal, much more equal society. So Taiwanese people, in this sense, is more westernized, which is more individualized. So in this sense, or you can say it's more civilized. People were individually equal, socially, not only politically.
When recently Chinese tourists visited Taiwan, many Taiwan residents were put off by the visitors' vulgarity, loud speech, spitting in public, and littering. But what most created friction was Chinese people's belief that Taiwan is part of China.
Chinese people don't understand why Taiwanese people don't think they are part of China. We are from the same ancestors. Okay, this is what Chinese people think. How come you Taiwanese betray your family ancestors and believe in independence? So this hurt Chinese and anger all the Chinese. Taiwanese people don't think Taiwan should be part of PRC, but Chinese people don't understand this. So that's the major division between Taiwan and China.
Taiwan, so long separated from China, has been influenced by many other cultural relationships. This peanut farmer and former videographer turned his family's traditional farm into a seller of gourmet peanuts. He has a feel for food fashions.
我们在台湾，我有发现，其实我们的饮食习惯其实蛮 westernized，就是很西方，就是只要是新的东西，台湾就很快就会吸收进来。不就是新的，对台湾人对于新的事物是接受度很高的。就比如说最早，比如说我们台湾吃 hamburger 这个。可能有以前早期有美军一来的，台湾人很快的就接受了那个 hamburger 的习惯，三明治。
那为什么没有自信？
为什么没有啊？没有 proud of 自己的做的事情。普遍上来讲，进口的，这个美国来的，这个德国来的，这个日本来的，都觉得好棒。台湾的还好。
Such openness to the outside and multiculturalism are key to Taiwan, which has also welcomed 1 million foreign workers and migrants, mostly from Southeast Asia. This has brought new social tensions. Here at the offices of New Bloom magazine, I learned how Taiwan's global conflict zone star status dates from 2022.
Nancy Pelosi, the then U.S. Speaker of the House, her visit to Taiwan. So as the first U.S. Speaker of the House to visit Taiwan in 25 years. And so then China responds with military drills. These are close to Taiwan. They're doing the third Taiwan Straits crisis. And so there's so much more focus on Taiwan after that, because the notion that it can be a dangerous flashpoint.
Pelosi's visit was intended to show American support for Taiwan's democracy. China responded aggressively with live fire exercises and a simulated blockade of Taiwan. To Beijing, Pelosi's gesture went contrary to a deal to keep hands off Taiwan agreed with the U.S. in the 1970s, when under President Richard Nixon, the U.S. recognized Beijing as the sole government of China and acknowledged but did not recognize China's claim that Taiwan was part of China. That left open who had the right to govern Taiwan. Washington just encouraged China and Taiwan to reach a peaceful settlement. Since Pelosi, China has ratcheted up pressure on Taiwan with gray zone harassment, most recently meting out what they called punishment for President Lai's 2024 inauguration. But the Taiwan public has grown so used to Chinese bluster that these actions arouse scant concern. These air raid drills in 2023 were met with boredom.
And so it is kind of just like my everyday environment. And so people are like, yeah, people are freaking out in the streets and seeking out air raid shelters and that kind of thing. I'm just like, no, people are just going about life and going to convenience stores and walking around and shopping or whatever. And so just life goes on in that sense.
But the threat is real. The incursions are also military probes and feints that may be part of a future attack. China is massively building up its military forces. According to U.S. intelligence, it would be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. But invading, or hybrid strategies such as a blockade, pose challenges much, much greater than the Russians faced in moving overland into Ukraine. For one, Chinese forces would have to cross the 160-kilometer-wide Taiwan Strait, known for its rough seas, in the face of what could be determined resistance. This makes invasion extremely risky, costly, and liable to failure. It is the last resort for China while it tries to bring about Taiwan's early capitulation by other means.
所以，对中国而言，他跟你做任何的交流，他其实真正的目的，他念之在之的，他的终极的目标就是希望兼并台湾。当然以他们的政治正确的用语，他们说这个叫做统一台湾。
China constantly manipulates cross-strait trade, selectively shutting off its market to Taiwan's agricultural goods, for example. It strong-arms everyone from businessmen to politicians and journalists to oppose the ruling party, the DPP. Many Taiwanese performers routinely avoid politics for fear of being banned in China. For having waved an ROC flag on TV, this singer was forced to give a humiliating public apology. But that made China look like a bully. So now it just makes them declare they are Chinese and favor unification. China also uses espionage.
中国搞间谍是人海战术，人海战术就是我就100万人、200万人，我就这样撒下去，资源撒下去，有的可能成功，有的可能不成功，但是成功的能够为中国共产党所用，那它就能够发挥相当大的功能，大概中国是以这样的大规模的方式在做我们叫做对台湾的统战工作。
跟中国的打仗已经开始了没有？
对我来讲，战争一直都在进行当中。因为现代的战争它比较复杂，它不是只有一般的陆海空军的作战而已，它包含网络的作战，包含统战的工作，外交战、贸易战、金融战，还有像我最着重的认知作战，就是舆论战。
Among the most insidious threats are those that come via disinformation on the internet and via news media. Taiwan gets more of that aimed at it than any other place in the world. The constant barrage aims to sow discord.
让大家彼此之间有很大的一种仇恨，这个是他想要在我们的社会制造的。他最希望说那个仇恨是能够到内战的程度。
But of late, Chinese cajoling and threats, focusing on, for example, the benefits of its one country, two systems offer, have fallen flat.
所以他慢慢就要改变他的战术。所以他现在非常重要的战术不是说中国有多好，有些年轻人听不进去啊，说中国有多好，他不想听这些。所以他目的反而改成告诉你美国有多烂，日本有多烂。就说哦，你说中国有人权问题，美国、日本也都有人权问题。所以当他这样子的方式，会让更多的，尤其是年轻人，会觉得每一个国家都有自己的 propaganda， 每个国家其实都在做类似的事情。所以当他觉得每一个国家都差不多的时候，他在慢慢告诉你说，其实中国对我们很好，那个效果才会好。那这个都是为了要铺成最后的，不管是战争的投降，还是战争前的或战争后的和平协议，那个是他最重要的目的。
Perhaps even more worrisome than the cognitive and economic warfare, however, is whether Taiwan is prepared for military conflict with China. Admiral Li Shimin, head of the Taiwan military until 2019, and now also an author, is unhappy with what he calls the dangerous common view in Taiwan.
台湾人现在的问题是说，他也不想打仗，但是他也不想投降。其实这是一种很糟糕的态度，因为如果你不想打仗，你要拿出方法来。
According to polling, most respondents say they are very or somewhat willing to defend Taiwan if China attacks, but that leaves a significant portion who apparently lean toward capitulation or rapprochement, reflecting broader political divisions. He believes Taiwan needs to be ready to fight.
不打仗当然是最好的选择啦，但是问题是，你愿不愿意接受不打仗的条件嘛？对不对？这个我也相信，这个中国大陆它这个一国两制、和平统一，我相信啊，但是并不代表你一定要接受他们的政治制度。但如果你还是要坚持这个生命的价值、生活的意义，你如果还有一些这些坚持，你认为这个 human right， 对不对？这 democracy， 对不对 ？justice。这些都很重要。那你要捍卫自己的话，你要为你的生活方式捍卫的话，你就没有办法同意他的和平方案。
How ready is Taiwan? Its military is just a tenth the size of China's. Size doesn't always matter in things military, but Taiwan's approach has been criticized for such things as reliability and poor training of new recruits. Many point to lessons it needs to learn from Ukraine.
过去啊，在20-30年前呢，我们用传统的方法来准备我们自己，因为那个时候中国还没那么强，那是没有问题的。但现在中国越来越强大，你要防卫自己，就要用一个不对称的思维，因为你用对称的思维，它的资源。不管是人力、物力、财力，都远远超过于你。你用相同跟他一样的方法来对抗他，你注定要失败。
Traditional defense relies on big ships and advanced planes, all very expensive and easily blown up by the enemy. Asymmetrical defense is about smaller, more maneuverable, more survivable weapons, like shoulder-launched anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, or unmanned boats and drones like those used in Ukraine. Only in the last couple of years, he says, on the advice of the American military, has Taiwan begun to take this tack.
我从军事观点上来看呢，我们并没有准备好，然后我也不认为哪一天我们会自己认为准备好了，因为这是一个永无休止的准备的过程。
Taiwan has its own defense industry and recently produced its own submarine and drones. Taiwan is trying to balance asymmetrical with a traditional defense. This policy contest reflects China's intensifying threat. President Xi Jinping insists China will use force, if needed, to bring about unification, which in his words is inevitable and cannot be passed on to future generations. A big part of China's timing will depend on what it thinks the U.S. is willing to do. Taiwan cannot stand alone. It can only fend off invasion until the United States comes to its aid. The U.S. has a policy towards Taiwan often described as strategic ambiguity, whose aim is to avoid taking sides and encouraging conflict. However, this means Washington won't officially say whether it would help Taiwan. President Biden says it will, and most Taiwanese believe it will. Even so, Taiwan's defense is first up to Taiwan.
The first question, I mean, not the first, but maybe the second question that they asked was, did you see the war coming in February 2022?
I am talking to Philip Nobel, a Czech journalist based in Taiwan, who in 2023 traveled as an interlocutor to Ukraine with Taiwan's leading experts in civil defense and the analysis of disinformation. They wanted to understand what Taiwan could learn from Ukraine's experience.
Literally everyone we talked to said we just could not believe it. So we were maybe intellectually prepared, but emotionally as beings, we were not prepared because we could just not imagine the reality and also the impact and the details of what does it mean when suddenly you're invaded by allegedly the biggest army, the most powerful army in the world, and the country collapses for a few days, right? And there's no preparation for this. And immediately then the question, I think, for a lot of Taiwanese people who think about those issues is, are we Taiwanese actually able to imagine, for example, a Chinese military invasion? And what should we do when it happens? So most of the conversations were precisely on what did you do then, once you kind of went through the shock of this information that you were able to even process, because it's huge. The message that a lot of Ukrainians told our Taiwanese friends was, don't think it can not happen. We don't know, you never know when, but you should not think that it will not happen. And if you want to avoid it, you should always think that it will happen. So it's kind of, preparing war to have peace.
Many people in Taiwan have not wanted to think about that, but increasingly they are. In a poll, 42% said they thought China would invade by 2027. That's up from 28% 2 years before. A few take shooting courses with plastic pellet guns. The mainstream learn about what to do in the event of invasion. In courses given by Kuma, thousands are learning to spot disinformation, to deal with emergencies when internet and electricity fail, to administer basic first aid, like tying a tourniquet, and how to survive in a conflict. These Kuma classes are booked up months ahead, and it plans to train 2 million people within a few years. More widely, Taiwan is preparing its defense. Apart from increasing its military budget yearly, with a 14% jump to $19 billion in 2024, and by extending military conscript training to a full year, the government has long been promoting its international profile and winning friends to make up for Taiwan's enforced diplomatic isolation. As of mid-2024, only a dozen tiny countries officially recognize Taiwan. The government also encourages business to reduce dependency on China trade, and in 2023, trade with Southeast Asia exceeded trade with China, which remained the largest trading partner. Taiwan has robust disinformation debunking. Independent groups track, analyze, and report on the deluge of lies sent towards Taiwan. Journalists like Brian Hioe are training to be war correspondents.
So I think it's better to be overprepared or prepare and then nothing happens. But also, what's interesting is China's always watching. So China, if they do see people preparing for this kind of thing, I mean, if you do have this notion that the population will resist and is taking measures, then that actually is a deterrent as well.
China is waging a battle for hearts and minds.
他告诉你的是你反抗是没用的，他一直在告诉我啊，反抗没用啊，解放军有多强啊，然后这个攻台7天之内台湾一定怎么样，他就是要告诉你反抗没有用，反抗没有用，反抗没有用。那我们这边呢，应该是要告诉大家说，其实我们有足够的能力保护自己。那后来这个乌俄战争，台湾人在看呢，台湾人在看什么？在看乌克兰可不可以抵挡俄罗斯的攻击。可是时间久了下来之后，大家发现说，其实抵抗不是没有用的，这也是会强化我们自己所说的，我们愿意去投资更多在国防上面， 所以这些事情是我知道中国一定会不断的施加更多的压力，但重点是我们政府的作为必须要让台湾的民众看到信心之所在，这才是重点。
I met someone who had no doubt about the number one domestic issue in Taiwan.
就是那个 geopolitics 地缘政治。
国内是最重要的问题是 geopolitics。
对啊，因为他们都在影响我们啊。因为这个 geopolitics 就是中国跟美国的关系如果不好，那它对台湾有一种影响；他们的关系很好，对台湾也是有影响。因为就是台湾就会变成是一个在中间的，很像就是一个 balance act， 就是你如何在这个很大的这个 super power 里面去找到一个平衡，让你还是可以 survive。我觉得这个是台湾很大的困境。
The U.S. is becoming under threat, so to speak, because you have the rising China and then you have the resurgent Russia, and the two seems to be in a quasi-alliance, challenging the U.S. Predominant position in international politics, the global economy, and particularly in terms of values and institutions. So I think that's where the conflict comes from.
This political, economic, and ideological competition, he notes, has been stoked by U.S. and Chinese stridency and by territorial disputes in the South and East China Seas. It is also strategic, as Taiwan is a fulcrum of U.S. dominance, supporting the defense of allies like Japan and South Korea. China hopes to displace U.S. power in the Pacific by taking control of Taiwan.
And it is within this context that you have the intensification of conflict between Taiwan and the PRC. And that has its roots, and everyone knows, back all the way to 1949 when China was divided and you have two governments, both claim the sovereignty of the other side. But that framework did not explain fully the ups and downs of cross-strait relations.
He says tensions rise or fall with the party in power. The KMT's opening to China from 2008 led to détente under former KMT President Ma. He and KMT hardliners want to revive that relationship, evidently pleasing Xi Jinping, even though the KMT's earlier cozying up to Beijing sparked the 2014 sunflower protests. That helped bring the China-wary DPP back into office in 2016, stoking a clash with Chinese nationalism.
So we have this change within Taiwan that coincides the change of the big picture, and both changes are in the direction of more confrontation and conflict with China. Taiwan involves the United States and PRC right now, the two really big powers in the world. And so if you do not handle the situation carefully, you may engulf the whole world.
But what could upset the balance and trigger war?
如果中国要强大的话，他照理说不应该打，他维持他更强大的发展，他战争一定有代价嘛，对，像俄国现在也要支付他的代价，但是呢，踩到底线的时候，他忍无可忍的时候，我不计任何代价我也要打，哪怕是 irrational 的 decision 我也做了，所以这个是两岸之间就是说，如果美中关系如果不好的话，那这个使得就是说大陆方面就是说变成可能有这种非理性的作为，他使用武力使用武力，所以我很难预测，但是只能说，当大陆发觉统一这个 option 是绝望的话，他就可能使用武力了。绝望，他现在还没绝望嘛？
For the artist, all these matters also impinge on Taiwan's ability to manage its own affairs.
所以我们是有我们自己的独立的政府，可是我们能不能称我们自己是一个国家？我们当然认为我们是一个国家，可是全世界没有人承认我们啊。即便我们自己想要说我们要成为一个独立的一个国家， 你看，马上美国不允许我们，中国当然也更不允许我们，周边都不允许，所以我们如何以国家的形式生存，这个都是非常现实的。
I am in Taipei at the memorial to Sun Yat-sen, known as the father of modern China.
His dreams of democracy and nationalism still linger today on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
Sun's ideas helped shape Taiwan's democracy, which ranks among the top 10 in the world today. Its success contradicts the Chinese Communist Party's insistence that liberal democracy is unsuitable for Chinese society. It shows the way for those who believe China could still move towards democracy, as Eastern Europe did after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991.
We have a modernization theory that with the economic situation improving, and you are going to have more urbanization, more educated young people, and contact with the international society increasing, and that would lead invariably to polarization and demand for democracy.
Some have given up on such predictions, but China may just be on a huge detour that dates back to just before 2012, when Xi Jinping and other hardline party members who experienced the Cultural Revolution began to reassert control in China. That ended a period of relative opening up with a new extremism that has soured U.S.-China relations.
They brought the result of their political socialization during that traumatic period of time to Chinese politics. But this generation is passing away. So sooner or later, China will move back, shift back to the original tendency, namely economic development and bringing about more polarization. We just have to be patiently wait for that to happen.
Demands for democracy in China have been harshly suppressed, most prominently in the 1989 Tiananmen protests, later in the Hong Kong uprisings, and most recently in the 2022 COVID lockdown-inspired protests with blank paper, representing what cannot be said. Even if cracks in the facade like these periodically reappear, China under Xi has pushed in the opposite direction towards totalitarianism. Taiwan and democracy enjoyed more sympathy in China earlier in the 2000s.
But not today's China. So today's China, we do the survey, and I think we are not surprised. The majority of Chinese people is to follow Beijing's position, and they think that way from their heart. Nobody forced them to do that way. So in terms of political support or the ideology in China, it's not the way that higher educated people or young people are more liberal. It's on the opposite side.
His survey research shows only some people over 50, those who remember Tiananmen and the Cultural Revolution, may be sympathetic to democracy or to Taiwan.
Today's younger generation, they believe in the party state's propaganda. They really believe so. They thought the democracy of the Western society actually are chaotic. And the Western society got very bad human rights record. And Taiwan's democracy is chaotic, is a joke. That's what Beijing government taught its people. And so they don't really value election democracy.
Then again, the specter of democracy so rattles Xi's Communist Party that it recently began touting the outright fiction that China is already a democracy. This reflects fears that democracy brings chaos and the demise of one-party rule, as happened in the Soviet Union. While popular support for democracy could change if Chinese society came under pressure, hopes for a shift that might ease tensions with Taiwan seem distant.
You don't see a way of sitting down and talking and finding a solution which both sides could accept under the current circumstances.
I understand your question, but no. When Taiwan and China, Beijing and Taipei sit together on the table, it means Taiwan accepts the one China principle, which is Taiwan is one part of PRC. Well, both sides agree Taiwan is one part of China, but for Beijing, that China is PRC. And for Kuomintang or even for DPP, that part is ROC. ROC is not part of PRC. Even there was a time PRC is part of ROC. Okay, so I don't think there is a formula accepted by both sides. So maybe the current status quo tense situation is the best because it's better than any military invasion, than any military conflict.
台湾人民和朝野政党的最大的共识，就是捍卫主权，以及我们民主自由的生活方式。这一点，我们没有妥协的空间。
In other words, this dispute has no likely resolution, short of putting off an uncertain outcome. But the standoff could endure for years. The best hope for peace is through talks, cool heads, and making the cost of harassment or invasion by China ever higher. That is the counterpart to Taiwan Foreign Minister Joseph Wu's dictum. Xi Jinping must wake up every morning and think that today is not the day to attack Taiwan.